Welcome to the D.E.A.D podcast, where I discuss all things spooky and weird. I'm Desi, and today I'll be talking about tragic love ghost stories and Valentine's Day murders. Let's get started. Hey everyone, how is everyone doing tonight? Happy Valentine's Day, because this is going to go out tomorrow, which will be Valentine's Day. In the spirit of Valentine's Day, I am wearing a t-shirt that has a skeleton and hearts, and it says, "If I had feelings, they would be for you." And I am drinking some 19 Crimes Snoop Dogg wine out of my skeleton hand wine glass. Tonight I wanted to talk about tragic love, lost, ghost stories, and then also a couple of true crime stories that happen on Valentine's Day in the name of love, and I hope y'all enjoy it. So let's get started. Tragic events can leave spirits on earth, and passionate love often ends in tragedy. Today, on the most romantic of holidays, we are going to explore these stories of love. Love so passionate, it leaves a heartbroken, supernatural stain on earth. The Bride on the Bridge. In Stowe, Vermont, lies a covered bridge they call Emily's Bridge. There are several versions of Emily's sad tale. Some versions say that Emily and her boyfriend were meeting at the bridge to elope, since her parents did not approve. He never came, and she hung herself from a rafter. Another version says Emily was left at the wedding altar. She hopped on a carriage to find her love. When she reached the bridge, one of the horses was startled, and she died in an accident. Some versions say she was killed by runaway horses on the way to her wedding. Whatever way you put it, Emily reached a tragic fate. Visitors to the bridge have reported scratch marks on their cars and bodies, and strange noises, such as footsteps, ropes tightening, and a girl screaming. If you park your car on the bridge, you might hear banging on the car or her body dragging on the car's roof. This next one is called a deathly love triangle. The Castillo de San Marcos in St. Augustine, Florida, is the oldest masonry fort in the United States. The site itself is dripping with paranormal activity. But today, we focus on an affair that led to murder. In 1784, Colonel Garcia Marti brought his young wife, Dolores, to the fort. He wasn't the most devoted husband and often ignored his wife. Thus, she found other ways to spend her time. She began an affair with her husband's assistant, Captain Manuel Abella. Dolores wore a very unique perfume, which Garcia smelled on Manuel one day. Shortly after, Dolores and Manuel went missing. Garcia told everyone that Dolores had returned to Spain and that Manuel had a special assignment in Cuba. About 50 years or so later, a hidden room was found in a dungeon behind a brick wall. The remains of a woman and a man were found. Some versions say chained to the wall. Some say in a pile of ashes. Sightings of a woman with a white dress have been reported on the site. Could it be Dolores? This next one is called A Forbidden Love. Annie Quay was the 15-year-old daughter of James and Marianne Quay. They lived in Forester, Michigan, so they often saw boats coming in and out of town. Minnie fell in love with a sailor. Not much is known about him, and her parents disapproved of this crush. One day, word came to town that his boat sank. Minnie was quite distraught, especially since her parents had forbidden her to say goodbye when he last left. Sometime after, she was babysitting her infant brother for her parents. She left her house and walked towards the waterfront. People near the town inn, the Tanner House, waved as she walked by. Suddenly, their friendly faces turned to faces of horror. as she walked into Lake Huron. Legend says she still walks the beach, waiting for her sailor to return. More frightening versions say she lures young girls toward the water and towards their deaths. This next one is called A Romantic Murder Plot. Jesse Strange deserted his wife and children and began a new life in Albany, New York. He lived under a new name, Joseph Orton, and began working at the Van Rensselaer's residence at Cherry Hill. He caught the eye of the affluent Elsie Van Rensselaer, a married woman. Jesse and Elsie decided their love could really flourish without Elsie's husband, John Whipple, around. No duh. In May of 1827, after a failed attempt of arsenic poisoning, Jesse Strange shot John Whipple. Jesse and Elsie tried to hide their murder plot, but they didn't cover their tracks very well. In June, Jesse Strange confessed to the murder and told prosecutors where to find the rifle. He believed that if Elsie was convicted as well, her powerful family connections would get them both pardoned, and he tried to lay the blame on her. But when his lawyer and the prosecutor told him that nothing he said against Elsie would lighten his punishment, he withdrew his confession. Members of the household testified that they had heard Strange spread the stories of prowlers out to kill Whipple. The merchants who sold him the rifle and the arsenic testified, as did the hotel keepers, who had seen Strange and Elsie together. But it was Strange's confessions, admitted over the objection of the defense, which sealed his fate. The jury deliberated for 15 minutes before returning a verdict of guilty. Elsie's trial followed the same course as Strange's, except the prosecution tried to call Strange as a witness. There was much debate over his eligibility to testify, because he had been convicted but not yet sentenced. In the end, the judge would not allow his testimony. The prosecution rested, and the jury, without leaving their seats, acquitted Elsie Whipple. Jesse Strange was found guilty of first-degree murder, and Elsie Whipple was found not guilty. According to an Albany tourist site, all members of this love triangle roamed the halls of Cherry Hill. People have witnessed a ghost on the bottom floor of Cherry Hill and believe it is Mr. Whipple. He is not hostile, but gives off a feeling of anger. Jesse Strange's ghost is seen where the gallows once stood, wearing the same clothes he wore the day of his execution. Imagine repeatedly running into both of your exes in the afterlife. Yeah, fuck that. Now we take a look at some of the most shocking murders to happen on Valentine's Day. Here's what to know about the night South African Olympic runner Oscar Pistorius shot his girlfriend Riva Steenkamp more than a decade ago in a Valentine's Day killing that jolted the world and shattered the image of a sports superstar. Pistorius, a world-famous double amputee sprinter who competed on carbon fiber blades at the 2012 London Olympics, was released on parole on January 5, 2024, having served nearly 9 years in prison for murder. He has always maintained he shot Steenkamp in a tragic mistake in the pre-dawn hours of February 14, 2013. Thinking she was a dangerous intruder in his home in the South African capital, Pretoria, prosecutors said he killed Steenkamp, a 29-year-old model and reality TV star, intentionally during a late-night argument and then made up the intruder story. A judge initially accepted Pistorius' story, but South Africa's Supreme Court of Appeal overturned a lesser manslaughter conviction against him after an appeal by prosecutors and found him guilty of murder. Pistorius did not deny that he shot 4 times through a locked toilet cubicle door in his home, with his licensed 9mm pistol hitting Steenkamp in the head, arm, and hip. But the reason for Pistorius opening fire formed the central part of his dramatic 2014 murder trial, which lasted 7 months and was broadcast live across the world. He testified that he heard a noise in the bathroom in the middle of the night and believed there was an intruder in his house. He said he grabbed his gun from under the bed where he had been sleeping next to Steenkamp and went to the bathroom. When he heard a noise from the cubicle, he fired through the door in what he said he thought was self-defense. Steenkamp was hit on the other side of the door. Pistorius's story was attacked by prosecutors who asked how did he not first check on where Steenkamp was if he was so concerned about a dangerous intruder. They said he even had to walk past Steenkamp's side of the bed to get to the bathroom. Pistorius said he had woken up and had gone out onto the balcony to retrieve a fan when he heard the noise from the bathroom and was scared and panicked. He said he rushed to get his gun and presumed Steenkamp was still in bed. Once he saw Steenkamp was not in bed after the shooting, he realized she might be the person in the toilet, he testified. Pistorius said he had to break down the locked toilet door with a cricket bat in a vain effort to save her. Prosecutors alleged that at the start of the trial that Pistorius had taken the time to put on his prosthetic legs before shooting Steenkamp. They said it showed premeditation and he wouldn't have done that if he was reacting suddenly to what he thought was a dangerous intruder. Pistorius's defense lawyers showed the angle of bullet holes in the toilet door, which was brought into court as an exhibit, proved he fired the shots while standing on his stumps, and prosecutors later conceded Pistorius did fire the deadly shots while he did not have his prosthetic legs on. Pistorius's lawyers even had him walk around the courtroom without his prosthetic legs, hoping to show he was unstable and vulnerable without them, and how it might explain his panicked reaction to a possible threat in his home. The basis of the prosecution's case was that the couple, who had only been dating for a few months, had a late-night argument, and Steenkamp fled to the bathroom in fear of angry Pistorius. Neighbors testified that they had heard shouting and screams coming from Pistorius's villa around 3 a.m. before loud bangs. Prosecutors said it showed the couple were arguing before the gunshots. Pistorius's lawyers said the screams came from him after he realized what he had done, and the bangs were him hitting the door with a cricket bat to get to Steenkamp. The manager of the gated community where Pistorius lived and his daughter were the first people on the scene after the shooting. While carrying Steenkamp's bloodied body down the stairs when they arrived. The Supreme Court of Appeal ultimately convicted Pistorius of the murder under a specific South African legal principle because he acted with such recklessness when he shot through the door, and should have known someone would have been killed without justification. It is comparable to a third-degree murder conviction, and Pistorius was sentenced to 13 years and 5 months in prison. But the final verdict did not definitively say if Pistorius knew he was shooting specifically at Steenkamp and intended to kill her. And that question, the very heart of the case, may never be fully answered. Next, we are going to be talking about Dr. Death. Couples usually look for romance on Valentine's Day. Romantic dinners, flowers, jewelry, that sort of thing. The last thing on anyone's mind is murder. But it turned out a bit different for Dr. John Hamilton and his wife Susan. Instead of a nightmare romance, she was strangled and had her skull bashed in. John and Susan met in 1985. They were both divorced and each had 4 kids. Susan was the type of person that people just wanted to be around. John was a successful OBGYN in Oklahoma City. They were married in 1987. By all accounts, they were a happy couple living a great life. John seemed madly in love and showered Susan with expensive gifts. Susan started working at John's clinic. Besides gynecological exams and delivering babies, John also performed abortions. Unfortunately, as with all abortion clinics, there were protests out front and threatening phone calls. On February 14, 2002, John was scheduled to perform 2 surgeries. He and Susan had plans to meet at home between the surgeries to exchange cards and gifts. He had even ordered a bunch of red orchids to give her later that day. But when he got home, he found Susan's bloody, lifeless body strangled and beaten on the bathroom floor. Or so he said. He dialed 911, saying, "Please send the police. Please send an ambulance. Please. I think my wife is dead. Please send somebody quick." Emergency services found John covered in blood, trying to resuscitate Susan. She had been strangled using 2 neckties. Her head had been beaten so hard that part of her brain was visible. She was lying in a pool of blood. Police searched the home, but there was no sign of forced entry, and nothing was stolen. There was also no evidence of anyone being there. Police noticed that although John said he had given her mouth-to-mouth, there was no blood on his face. Even though she had bloody facial injuries, they were immediately suspicious. The police found the card that Susan gave John for Valentine's Day. She wrote, quote, "I bought this 2 weeks ago, so I guess maybe it doesn't seem so appropriate, but I do love you. Have a good day, Susan." End quote. The message enhanced the police's suspicions. According to one of Susan's friends, Susan thought John was having an affair. She found out that John had frequently been making calls to a topless dancer. He claimed that she was a patient he was trying to help. Friends claimed that Susan was thinking of divorcing John. John was taken into custody. There were initial questions about John being the killer because of the close timing between his 2 scheduled surgeries. Then police learned that John had been late for his second surgery. Investigators found Susan's blood and skin on his car's steering wheel. He claimed to have moved his car so the ambulance had room to park. Blood was also found on one of John's shoes. A blood expert said that it was consistent with splatter that comes from someone who was alive. When the trial started, the community rallied around John. They all saw the Hamiltons' perfect life and how much they loved each other. No one could believe that John was capable of murdering the woman he loved, and both John and the dancer he had been speaking to denied the affair. District Attorney Wes Lane said that the prospect of Susan divorcing John had driven him to murder. He said John was obsessed with Susan. The defense team said that the investigators didn't spend enough time investigating threats made by anti-abortionists. John said that a militant anti-abortionist group called the Army of God had faxed a wanted poster with his face on it to his office. The Army of God group were supporters of a sniper that killed a New York abortion provider in 1998. At trial, the defense's blood expert, Tom Bevel, said the blood on John's shoe could have happened when he was trying to help her. The prosecutors asked Bevel if there was any other blood that was missed. Bevel admitted that blood was found in the cuff of John's shirt. Bevel was forced to admit that it could have been from John beating Susan. This was the turning point at the trial. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours and found him guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced John to life without the possibility of parole. The judge told John the majority of jurors were very disappointed they didn't have the sentence of death as an option. You should consider yourself very lucky. He will be spending every Valentine's Day for the rest of his life in the Dick Connor Correctional Center in Hominy, Oklahoma. So, what did y'all think? Let me know if y'all have heard of any of these ghost stories or the Valentine's Day true crime stories. Let me know what y'all did or are doing for this Valentine's Day. Hope y'all have a good Valentine's Day. Love ya. That brings me to the end of this episode. Thanks for listening to the D.E.A.D podcast. Please follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at the D.E.A.D podcast. Also, feel free to send in your stories, episode suggestions, or feedback at thedeadpodcast1@gmail.com, or send me a DM on Instagram. If you enjoyed this show, please rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you are listening on, and be sure to come back next week for my next episode.